coming into this exciting and interesting webinar. It's glad to see you all here. Despite the time zone difference, and yeah, I hope that we can learn so much from this webinar today. So a bit introduction for those you who haven't known much about Climate Tracker. Climate Tracker is an international non-profit organization aiming to support, train, and incentivize young journalists in the world, in especially developing countries, to tell better climate stories. Our focus is in the global south, especially the Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Uh, yeah, we used to have programs for young climate journalists to be able to tell better climate stories, including this webinar, which is a short online training to how to tell better climate stories, especially in rainforest stories. So yeah, like I said earlier, I am and we are from Climate Tracker are very excited to have you all here to talk about these interesting but also important issues. As you might know, Southeast Asia is deemed as one of the heavens for rainforests in the world. It has millions of hectares of tropical rainforests spanning over dozens of countries in the region. So apart from Southeast Asia, we also have what we call Amazon uh, rainforest basin and the Congo River basin. Those are the three largest rainforests left in the world. Uh, this rainforest ecosystem is also very important right now, especially for mitigating the climate change, the anthropogenic climate change, because it's caused by human activities and so on. Because rainforest helps, thanks to its ability in absorbing and storing some of the carbon and also other greenhouse gases emissions. Unfortunately, we are losing this important ecosystem bit by bit due to, for example, plantations and illegal logging. Those are two of the most common cases here in Indonesia. But fortunately, several people, especially those who are living in or around the forest, are working hard to restore the forest bit by bit, because their lives are depending on these rainforests. And yeah, I personally believe this is an important issues and also interesting issues that to be told, because uh, yeah, to dramatize it a bit, our lives, our very lives, are depending on this ecosystem. So yeah, so we're going to talk about this topic or issue tonight or today, depending on where you are. I'm delighted to have two amazing guest speakers here. So first we have Dr. Chandra Silori. Hello, Dr. Chandra. Uh,
Hi,
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 Dr.
hi, Karisar. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Dr. Chandra. How are you?
Great,
Great.
wonderful.
So Dr. Chandra is from RICOF, an organization which focus one of their focus is on forest restoration in several regions in Southeast Asia. Later, we will hear more from Dr. Chandra about the general condition of rainforests here in the region, and also efforts done to restore this important ecosystem. And aside from Dr. Chandra, we also have Gaya Kabiko. Hello, Gaya.
Hello, Kuka. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Gaya. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Great. So Gaya here is a journalist from the Philippines who mostly covers about this issue on rainforest or forestry. She is one of our fellows, or one of Climate Tracker fellows. She participated in two programs, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, Gaya. So yeah, she will have more stories to be told on how to cover these important, interesting, but sometimes kind of underreported issues on rainforests in Southeast Asia. So yeah, without further ado, let's move on to our first speaker. It's Dr. Chandra. So a little bit introduction on Dr. Chandra. Dr. Chandra Silori is the Deputy Executive Director for RICOF. The organization works on forest restoration in several regions in Southeast Asia, including Indonesia and the Mekong region. So it should be in kind of Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia, if I'm not mistaken. So Dr. Chandra has been working in participatory forestry management for more than 25 years, including 12 years in Southeast Asia. His professional experience includes policy and application, research on participatory forest management, and climate change mitigation and adaptation. So yeah, we will hear more about the general condition of rainforest and forest restoration from Dr. Chandra. Without further ado, Dr. Chandra, the platform is yours.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. Can you all see my screen? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen? Wonderful. Okay. Uh, Thank you very much for this opportunity, colleagues from Climate Tracker. I think very pertinent and very timely uh, to talk about the restoration efforts in the forestry sector. You know, Southeast Asia as a whole is known as one of the rich biodiversity hotspots of the world. But unfortunately, we are also losing the forest in the region very, very rapidly. So I think, it's high time that we really start seriously think about how we can keep those forests intact. How can we bring the forests which we have lost and the biodiversity that these forests support? And on top of that, the millions and millions of people who depend on the forest for their daily livelihood. So I'll be briefly talking about the forest restoration through community forestry, one of the approaches of forest management, which is pretty much basically engaging local communities who reside in or around the forest area. How do you bring them into the forest restoration efforts? Uh, Moving on, I'm not really sure how many of you have heard about RECOFT. Uh, it's an international organization. It's based in Bangkok, and at RECOFT stands for Regional Community Forestry Training Center for Asia and the Pacific. That is how this short name is RECOFT, with C silent at the end. So that's how we pronounce it, RECOFT. So at RECOFT, we believe in a future where people live equitably and sustainably in and besides healthy forest. We take a long-term approach, landscape approach, and inclusive approach by engaging local communities, people who depend on the forest, helping those communities to secure their land titles and resource use rights. Also, through that mechanism, stop deforestation and build alternative livelihoods for the communities who depend on the forest resources for their livelihood. And on top of all these, we also ensure the gender equality because women play a strong role in managing these forests. They have a rich knowledge, traditional knowledge of managing the forest resources. So if you leave them out of the forest management, then you are nearly leaving 50% of the population out of the forest management scope. So I think that's an important component that we always keep in mind whenever we design any program, any project related to the forest management. And climate change, as we all are aware, is one of the major challenges that global community is facing. So we also work on combating climate change, using forest as one of the approaches to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change. We are here in this region for nearly 30 years, and we have our offices located in 7 countries. in Southeast Asia, which cover 5 Mekong countries: Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, and Indonesia, and Nepal in South Asia. So these are the 7 countries that we work in. Our offices are located in these 7 countries, but our main office, headquarter, as you may call it, is located in Bangkok. And in all these 7 countries and the region as a whole, we have trusting relationship at all levels, right from grassroots up to the policy level in all these countries. Our work of influence and partnership extends from ASEAN region to multilateral institutions, governments, and local communities, as I said. Uh, we help communities and countries in this region to achieve the sustainable development goals of the United Nations for poverty alleviation, addressing hunger, food security, environmental management, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and gender equality. So to do all these activities that I just listed out, community forestry is our entry point basically. Uh, I'll give you some of the example how we actually approach all these activities that I just listed. So community forestry for everyone's information is an approach of forest management which is more like a participatory approach. It's not there's no definite or standard application definition of the community forestry. But briefly, it's a participatory approach of forest management where you can bring different stakeholders together in managing the forest resources in much more sustainable way. Uh, so community forestry we take as an entry point, as I said, for various challenges that we are facing in the forestry sector. Ranging for livelihood security, climate change mitigation adaptation, or sustainable development goals, achievement of those goals. So at Recout, we work with thousands of indigenous and local communities, to restore the forest landscapes. Uh, so I would like to basically give you a couple of examples, couple of stories that we are currently implementing in a couple of our focal countries about forest landscape restoration, and how communities are involved in that, and what our role as an organization is to build that relationship between communities and other stakeholders while pursuing the forest landscape restoration. Before I take you to action on the ground through a couple of these examples, I would like to explain why community forestry is a natural climate solution. Uh, as I said, through community forestry, local communities are trained to monitor forest conditions. They are using these forest resources for their daily needs. So they are the best custodian who have very good knowledge of what's going on in their forest area, and therefore can be involved in monitoring the forest conditions, restoring the forest resources, and also nurturing the healthy forest for long term into the future basically. This work of engaging communities sets the stage for carbon sequestration, because they believe that the communities own the forest, and therefore they are the best stewards of the forest management or managing the forest resources. Uh, Moreover, community forestry provides local communities with opportunities to adapt to climate change and protection against natural and economic shocks, as we are currently facing this COVID-19 pandemic. And our finding in our research, we have done a research recently about what impact COVID-19 has created among the community forestry groups. And we have found that some of those communities who are dependent on the forest resources have really faced serious impacts because of the COVID-19. So that's an entry point for our work. Moving on, forest landscape restoration in Southeast Asia. What is the status? Where are we standing at the moment as far as the forest landscape restoration in the Southeast Asia is concerned, basically? More than 2 billion hectare of forest worldwide provides opportunity for restoration. Just to give you a global picture now, at the moment, globally, we have roughly 2 billion forest area, which is suitable for forest restoration, which means it's in a very poor condition. It's in a very degraded condition. So that really needs to be restored. I'm sure you must have heard about the Bond Challenge. So Bond Challenge has called for joint efforts to restore about 150 million hectares of degraded and deforested areas by 2020 and 350 million hectares by 2030. So these are the targets which are global targets set in terms of the forest restoration. These are huge, ambitious targets, but very, very important target that we need to set to achieve, to restore those degraded forest area. Coming to Southeast Asia, the rate of deforestation and forest degradation continues to be high. I mean, most of the countries, except a couple of countries where we are seeing some kind of improvement in forest area, not necessarily the quality, but the area that, as we defined forest area, like for example, country like Vietnam has been showing some upward trend in terms of the forest area. China is also reporting some upward trend in forest areas. Country like India, Philippines are also showing some positive changes in the forest coverage, basically. But the question is that quality, how biodiverse these forests are. That's another question. But other countries in the region continue to report very, very high level of forest degradation or deforestation. According to a 2015 report by FAO, a little bit outdated or a little bit old report, about 5 years old, but still relevant. According to that report of Food and Agriculture Organizations of the United Nations, Southeast Asia region lost about 30 million hectare of forest between 1990 and 2015. In 25 years, 30 million hectare of forest, which is more than a million per year. If you take an average of the forest that we have lost, more than a million hectare of forest has been lost in per year in last 25 years in this region. So this is something which is an alarming situation, I must tell you, basically, as far as the forest degradation and deforestation in Southeast Asia is concerned. These are some numbers here. I hope you are able to see these slides here. These are some numbers which show that where are the countries standing in terms of uh, the the area under degraded quality of the forest, the estimated degraded land as percentage of the total forest area, and what are the targets for recovering those forest area. It's not that countries are not doing anything, but they have set their own targets to restore these forest areas in future, in next 10 years, next 20 years or so. For example, if you look at this table here, so countries like Laos is, reporting a pretty high percentage of degraded land when compared to their total area of the country. Similarly, Vietnam also has reported, although as I said earlier, Vietnam is also making very good effort in terms of regenerating some of the degraded forest. And on the extreme right column, if you look at it, there are very, very ambitious targets which these countries have set in terms of to restore their degraded forests. And for example, again, Laos, which has reported pretty high rate of deforestation, also has set very high targets for themselves, but like up to 70%, by 2020. I mean, this already, we are now in 2021, and I can tell you that certainly these targets have not been met. Countries are pretty far behind these targets, basically. Indonesia also has set a huge target to restore the degraded forest, basically. But these are just to give you an idea of what is the status of degradation, forest degradation in some of these ASEAN countries, what efforts countries are making to restore those degraded forests. Unfortunately, we do not have data on Malaysia, but I'm sure challenges in Malaysia are also something similar that other countries in the region are facing, basically. Moving on, this slide is more about the potential of forest restoration to sequester carbon. Climate change, as I said, is the global challenge that we all are facing now. So RECOFT is now, these are a couple of examples I'm going to give what exactly we are doing in terms of restoration of the degraded forest land. So we are pioneering a forest landscape restoration approach that uses market forces to combat climate change. How do we do that? I'll tell you about that a little bit later. We restore degraded forest and improve the well-being of the forest community. So we have a currently a project which we call as Flourish. This project is funded by German government under their international climate initiative called IKI. And that project is currently working in 3 countries in the region: Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. So these are 3 countries which are part of this initiative, which is long-term initiative. This project is for 4 years. We are in the 3rd year of the project now. So this project is currently underway, uh, and it offers many other FLR initiatives in the way that it harnesses market forces to restore the forest landscape. I'll just briefly tell you the difference between the market forces and the traditional landscape restoration. I'm sure you all are aware of, or you all read in the newspaper, that there are a lot of plantation programs which are run by different governments all over the world, basically, So they set their target. They want to plant so many million hectares of forest here and there and all those. But the difference between those initiatives and the one which I'm going to talk to you about is some of those initiatives remain pretty much technical forestry initiative, which are done by the technical expert. They involve communities as a laborer to plant the trees. And then in many cases, what happens is the success rate of this plantation is not necessarily very high, because the engagement of communities in these efforts, plantation efforts, is not really continued for a long time. And therefore, we might see very high success rate in the first 6 months, but as we move on, then we start reporting, success rate which is going down. Uh, so this is the difference that we are trying to bring in here. The pilot program that we are doing in 3 countries, in Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam, it establishes commercial business partnership between the forest communities and private sector companies to plant production forest and make sustainable products out of these plantation activities and sell them to the market. So in here, it's an incentive-based mechanism. So communities have certain incentives, certain interest to be part of these partnership between the communities and private sector. And private sector also has some interest, because the product there that comes out of the forest restoration, they are able to sell those products and earn the benefits. So that's an approach which is kind of more like a win-win situation for the communities as well as the private sector. The Flourish approaches gives communities a secured interest in restoring and sustainably managing their forests. Another key aspect that we take here is that the forest land that we target for restoration, first step we do is to make sure that these communities have the tenure security. They have the forest land is given to community as a group to manage, to decide how they want to manage their forest land, what kind of species they want to plant, how they want to harvest their forest resources, and all those kind of things. Yeah. In many cases, what happens, government owns the land, they involve local communities as laborers, but then communities do not have any incentives to continue working with the government in the long term. And therefore, we see many failure, many examples of these kind of plantation initiative being failed basically in the long run. So this is a different approach that we are taking here. You see in this picture, this forest is a teak forest, scientifically known as Tectona grandis, or there could be some other species. But this is a teak forest from Laos. It's a native species of high commercial value, and is one of the species we are working in Laos as well as in Nan province, which is in northern Thailand, where we are using this species as an species to restore the degraded forests. Just a little bit to tell about this species. This is a highly commercial species which has very high commercial value in the market, and it takes a long term. It takes nearly 25 to 30 years to really grow and become fully commercially viable to sell it and earn money for the local communities. But communities who are involved in this process are poor communities, so they cannot really wait for 25 to 30 years to get their tree mature and then sell it and then start earning income. So what we do that, there are other interventions through different mechanisms that we bring in. For example, have some kind of silvicultural practices in these plantation areas, where small diameter of the teak are kind of thinned or pruned, so the tree main trunk can really grow and can attain its commercial potential, commercial value in the long run. And then also in some cases we do mixed what you call the mixed plantation with other species in the early, so that people can continue earning their income. uh, this is another initiative that we take here. Villagers are involved in the business ideas. Basically, we involve them in plantation mechanism. We train them how to measure the growth uh, of the tree, the plantation that they have grown. So we encourage communities to grow trees, teak trees into maturity, to maximize both profit and carbon sequestration potential, because the mature tree definitely has higher potential of carbon sequestration. And the shift that we want to achieve through this kind of initiative is towards restoring the degraded forest and careful management of healthy forest, and which is away from clear cutting. So we do not encourage definitely that clear felling of the areas, and which again has its own negative implications. uh, this is one example. The picture that you see is a wooden playground. So this wooden playground, this is a private sector company in Thailand called Chalet. We have partnered with them, where they use those small diameter teak branches. You have to prune those teak trees to allow teak to grow uh, thick and strong in the long run, so that you can get a good commercial value in the long run. But what happens is, generally these small diameter teak, first of all, communities are not much aware of this thinning and these silvicultural operations. So therefore sometimes the teak tree will not really grow to the full potential. So we give the communities this training, how to thin, how to manage their teak plantation. And once they thin those small diameter, then they do not know what to do. How do you add value to those small diameter teak trees? So this is one of the examples that we do. So we have partnered with this company called Chalet, where you know we bring communities and this company together in Nan province in northern Thailand, and use that thin diameter teak to develop these kind of, or to build these kind of wooden playground for school kids and all. In Lao we have done a similar idea, but using a different using small diameter teak for something different product, which is called finger joints. You have seen the wooden planks where the small diameter teak can be joined together, and then you make a bigger, wider plank, which can be used for your roofing material, your flooring material, your walling, for your walls and all. So that's other idea. Again, pruning the small diameter teak branches and making use of those, adding some value. So these are some of the examples. So that's what we are trying to tell here, the market approach, so it's not simply just driven by communities are being just involved for plantation activity, but we are also bringing other player into the picture, and setting up these kind of partnership agreements, and then trying to increase the, or incentivize communities and the private sector to come together. Another example is from the southern Thailand. This is from a peatland, a peat swamp forest in southern Thailand. Uh, I'm sure you are aware of the carbon potential of peat swamp. Peat swamp generally are a forest area which is dominated by, generally by, tall grasses, and it is mostly inundated grasses, where inundated area where not many tree species can grow. But under those inundated water areas, they kind of store the carbon, which is otherwise, if you cut these forests, then those areas are going to emit huge amount of carbon. So peat swamps have 4 times higher potential of restoring carbon as compared to other terrestrial forests. So this is a forest area of roughly about 21,000 hectare forest in called a place called Kon Kreng in Thailand, in southern Thailand, and it is second highest peat swamp forest in Thailand here. So it has its own, biodiversity value. It has its own environmental value. It has its own commercial value. So it's a major carbon sink, as I said. It's one of the major carbon sink, and which is up to 58, which can store about to 58 million tons of carbon in these peat swamp areas. But if these peat swamps are destroyed or degraded, then that 58 million tons of carbon which is stored will be emitted into the environment. So that's the importance of these peat swamps. And it's about a home of 152 villages and roughly about 150,000 people who are living in this peat swamp area for their livelihood. How do they use this? They this is a grass you see in the picture here. This is a tall grass which grows in this peat swamp area, and these people cut this grass and make a variety of products, like baskets and number of other things which then go into those big shopping malls and markets and all over Thailand and even out of Thailand. So this was a project which was funded by UNDP, and where Recoft, we helped to work with these communities, trained them in how to restore the peat swamp area, how to manage it sustainably for the long run, and then also working with the schools, 13 schools in the peat swamp area, where we work with the school to integrate uh, the knowledge or curriculum about the peat swamp ecology, and how to involve these school students in peat swamp management. Currently, these villagers are working to scale up the small scale enterprise based on sedge grass that you see here, or jute and other peat swamp material, and they are preparing to provide ecotourism experiences also for the people who are coming from outside. And we involve school students for bird watching and nature trails and all. So there are different ways where we are trying to build the local economy, also at the same time restoring the peat swamp forest here. So these are a couple of examples that I gave you, where Recoft is directly involved in restoring the degraded forest areas, for the local benefit, for the local economy, for the environmental benefit, for the biodiversity conservation, for climate change benefits. And we can incentivize these initiatives by 5 kinds of sustainability. We talk about, when we approach these restoration, we keep these 5 sustainability and elements in the mind. First one is the market financial, transparent price setting. When you work with these communities who are using sedge grass, for example, to make different handicraft item or different products. So, or when we are partnering with the local private sector companies, for example, in Nan province or in Lao, the examples I gave. So we want to make sure there's a fair, transparent price setting between the communities and the private sector. There's no, there's no hidden agenda of any of these party there. Long-term partnership agreements are set up. We facilitate that process of setting up these partnership. Legal and sustainable forest products. So it's not that those forest product people are using are coming from unsustainable practices. No, we also are aware of that. We inculcate that sustainable practicing approaches there. Value chains, business clusters, right to sell the timber. So to all legal aspects also we support them. Social, next element of social sustainability is social sustainability. How do we do that? We support systems for organizing groups, sharing the benefits, introducing fair benefit sharing mechanism among the communities, between the community and the private sector, payment for restoring and maintaining the forest and its ecosystem services. Third element is about the technological. How do you bring the technology in sustaining the initiative that we do? Ability to add the value product, or close to the forest landscape, or linking these communities to the market using technology approach, or using appropriate equipment to build the capacity of these communities. Fourth one is more about sustainability, which is mainly about designing approach. The example I gave you about this teak wood playground. So how do you design those kind of initiatives, farm design or forest management, or access to the water resource, or diversification of the products, or so that communities keep continuing getting their income from different sources. They don't have to wait for 25 years for teak to grow, but in between, there are different income streams which are continue to flow, and communities continue to get the benefits. Payment for ecosystem services, the services that ecosystem offers to it in terms of water, biodiversity, and also there are some payment mechanisms which have been tried in different countries, and also ability to adapt. The fifth and the final sustainability element is a legal and institutional, where lands, as I said earlier, the communities who are using this forest land, who are there living in those forest land for centuries, they have their secure land titles. Otherwise, they will not have any incentive to work with the government or work with other stakeholders in these lands. So their land tenure is secured, forest tenure is secured, and there are fair and simplified forest and timber regulations which we can promote in while applying. So finally, there are some challenges as well which we face when we take these kind of approaches for forest restoration. uh, with some of the challenges are related with disincentives. There are, it could be at the policy level, it could be at the technological level. So these we aim to remove these incentives, and so that local communities, indigenous peoples are willing to partner with the natural climate solutions, willing to partner with the private sector. There are disincentives for the private sector as well. It's not only for the communities. So we also try to address those challenges for the private sector so that they partner with the local communities. As I said earlier, community forestry is one of the entry points for us to remove these disincentives while we build the climate change resilience and of the forest communities. In all our community forestry incentives or initiatives, we ensure that communities have secure land and forest use rights are secured for them. Without those, they will not have any incentive to work with these, with the communities, with the government in any way. And we train them to manage the community forest sustainability. We have different kind of capacity building approaches that we use, not only for the communities, but for all stakeholders, right from grassroots up to the policymaker, central level, at the national level, or regional or global level. Uh, and then we support these communities to establish the nature-based solutions enterprises. Our greatest challenge are our greatest opportunities. For example, communities and those of us supporting them need to learn to speak the language of the private sector. Because private sector come from different direction, or they come with different objectives. They always are profit driven. That is what they come from. Basically, that's what they come from. So how do we ensure that we speak the same language? Private sector understand the language of the community, the civil society who work with these communities. So how do you bring everybody on the same level playing field? So that's a key challenge here. We need to work together to establish successful model of partnership between the communities, private sector, and the governments. The government has an important role to play there. So these kind of tripartite kind of models where all three key players can come together, and we play a role of facilitators, mediators, bringing them together. Uh, Lastly, these models, whatever we are proposing, should be bankable. What do we mean by bankable? That all the players involved in that have some level of benefit. Private sector, as I said, comes with the profit mindset. So they will not put their money if they don't see any profit from this these kind of partnership. Communities will not come in the partnership if they don't see that their rights are being secured, their daily needs are being still protected from the forest resources and all. So they have to have some kind of incentive, and they should be bankable. Uh, Communities, NGOs, investors, and companies all are working at different scale, as I said. So our model need to accommodate and bridge those scales and try to bring them at the same level playing field, and having this mutual trust, mutual respect for each other. And we look forward to basically sharing what we have learned and learning from others here today. I'm really looking forward for the question answer session, basically, and also learning from my fellow panelists here, in terms of, this is what we do as technical expert organization. That's one thing, but how do you communicate these to the end users, to the communities who may not understand those technical language? That's the role where people like you, the climate tracker, who are playing that role to simplify that language and communicate to the common citizen what we are doing, why the forests are important, why there's a role for private sector, how you can mobilize certain policy level support, advocacy level support to communities, to the policymakers. So that's where people like you come in picture and help us, where we sometimes are a little bit too technical when we communicate what the community forestry is all about, what climate change is all about, what is private sector, what is forest landscape restoration and all. But that's where we see these kind of partnership, mutual partnership with different stakeholders coming together, simplifying the process, communicating effectively, and bringing everybody together on the same platform. So thank you again for this opportunity. Really looking forward to receive questions, answer, and discussion with all the participants. So thank you again for this opportunity. And yes, over to you, Carissa. Thank you very much.
Thank you too, Dr. Chandra, for your it's very insightful presentation about the deforestation and also forest restoration in Southeast Asia. So, if I may make a brief recap from Dr. Chandra's presentation, the community forestry is a natural climate solution. So it's kind of different than the one done by a market or authorities, because some of done by market is not really sustainable and not really having high success rate, while the traditional efforts involving communities sometimes are more sustainable. And although there are still some challenges in restoring the forest in Southeast Asia, like how to make sure that all parties are speaking the same language, like communities are and private sectors, and also to make sure the communities understand that they are incentivized for their efforts. So yeah, that's my brief recap from Dr. Chandra's
My
presentation.
apologies. I went a little bit over time, so sorry for that. I just saw your your message in chat box now. Really sorry for that.
It's okay, Dr. Chandra. Yeah, because the deforestation and forest restoration is kind of large issues to cover. So yeah, no worries about that.
Sure.
So
Thank you.
Dr. Chandra has also addressed that we need to communicate these things in simple language, and I believe that's the duty of journalists. And maybe Gaya here can share how to tell stories about deforestation and forest restoration in more simple language to be more understandable and more appealing for uh, common audience. So Gaya is a journalist working for philstar.com, a media in the Philippines. She mostly writes about the environment, climate crisis, human rights, and health issues. She's a two-time Climate Tracker Fellows, including the latest one is Gaya is a fellow for the Climate Trackers Collaborative Journalism project on forest recovery. But yeah, I believe you can tell us more about that. So without further ado, Gaya, the platform is yours.
Hello everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Okay. Just a bit. It's my first time to actually share screen, so uh, okay. There. Is my audio okay?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you well.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Good evening to those from Southeast Asia, and good morning or good afternoon to those from other parts of the world. I am Gaya Cabico. I'm a journalist based in the Philippines, as Kuka mentioned. Also, I'd like to thank Climate Tracker for inviting me to share ways to cover forestry issues, as well as my recent experience in visiting communities who are working to bring back forest while a health crisis continues to rage on. So why should journalists report about forest? Forests provide important uh, goods and services to everyone. They give us supply of food, raw materials for livelihood, good quality of water and air. For indigenous peoples, forests serve as their home, their markets, and their hospitals. For wildlife, forests are essential habitats. During storms, healthy forests serve as barriers against strong winds, heavy rain, and erosion. They also play a role in curbing climate change as trees absorb planet warming carbon emissions. But they are under threat, as mentioned by Dr. Chandra earlier, especially the world's tropical forest, and many of these are in Southeast Asia. In the Philippines, for example, 90% of the country was believed to be covered with forest in the 16th century, but it declined to about 70% in the early 1900s, and the country lost millions more in the succeeding years. As of 2015, the country had approximately 7 million hectares of forest. So as journalists, it is our duty to provide a picture of how it is on the ground, raise the attention of the government, and make people aware about the current conditions of our forest and even the situation of people who are bravely defending these ecosystems. Okay, so whenever we talk about forest related stories, the usual stories are forest losses, the relentless pace that we're cutting down trees, and the activities that fuel deforestation. But there are other stories that we can also pursue. And I'm going to give some story ideas in the succeeding slides. I included works of journalists in Southeast Asia. So the first one is reporting on deforestation before it actually happens. So it is here's a story from Hans Nicholas Jong, a journalist based in Indonesia. So in the story, the plans for expansion of pulp and paper companies threaten to reverse declining forest losses in Indonesia. His story was based on the analysis of data from an NGO. Another example of this would be reporting about the potential impacts of development projects, say a dam on forest. Of course, building a massive dam will lead to deforestation, destruction of habitats, and displacement of residents. So even before the actual project begins, we have to report on this. So in a way, we can sound the alarm and people will be aware of the impacts and perhaps take action. So this we can also report on the impacts of forest degradation. This story discussed that the terrible state of watersheds in the Philippines was a critical factor in the floods that submerged communities um, when Typhoon Bamko, locally known as Ulysses, hit the country in November last year. Of course, there was an excessive amount of rain dumped by the typhoon, but the deforestation of Sierra Madre, it is the longest mountain range in the Philippines and is home to nearly half of the country's remaining old growth forest, also contributed to the inability of watersheds to absorb water. Another is identifying problems with policies and programs or the lack of actual policies. This is one of the earliest stories that I wrote about forest issues. Conservationists in the Philippines lament that aside from destructive human activities and the weak enforcement of forestry regulations, the lack of laws contributes to the plunder of forest resources. In general, green bills fail to flourish in the Philippine Congress despite being the country being one of the most vulnerable nations to the catastrophic impacts of climate change. So if we're writing about forest, we can also look into the status of initiatives seeking to protect forest in our own countries. What's keeping legislators from passing these bills? Why is forest protection not priority? And if there are laws or regulations, then why are they not implemented properly? Um, This story was part of the Climate Tracker Southeast Asia Forest Recovery Collaborative Journalism Project. Wow, that's long. And it's our project with KUKA. It's supported by the Pulitzer Center. So this story is about a group of farmers who participated in the Philippine government's biggest reforestation effort. So maybe you're asking, what's the problem here? Um, so these farmers, they participated in the National Greening Program where they were tasked to prepare sites, plant seedlings, and protect established sites. So, but in 2019, there was an audit report saying that the program missed 88% of its target. Just a little background, NGP was aimed at planting 1.5 million trees in 1.5 million hectares of land from 2011 to 2016, and it has been extended until 2028 with more ambitious goals. So the COBA report, audit report, uh, found that people's organizations tend to leave sites when their maintenance and protection contracts end after 3 years. That was the case of the farmers in the story. Actually, it was also mentioned by Dr. Chandra earlier about the failure to maintain sites after the planting period. The farmers in the story could not afford to finance the maintenance of site on their own because they have limited funds. So after we identify the problem, we should also provide recommendations in our stories. In this case, I included the recommendation of state auditors to the government, urging them to slow down the implementation of the program and shift its strategy from being target driven to becoming community centered. And the government must also take into consideration maintenance and make sure that the seedlings don't die in the process. Um, yeah, so there are a lot of stories about tree planting activities, but only few monitor the progress or actual impacts of massive greening programs. The public is entitled to know if the seedlings actually develop into real trees, especially if the activity is government led, because it's their money that funded these programs. This is a good example. The story was based on the first peer-reviewed study that assessed the success of the National Greening Program. The study used satellite images to analyze the results of the project. The scientists said there was a decline in forest loss when the National Greening Program began, but losses increased in 2016. That was the last year of the program's first phase, and became higher in the succeeding years. So for this kind of story, it would be nice to use data visualization tools such as maps, charts, charts, and satellite images to illustrate the changes over the years. Oh, um, this one is very important, amplifying the voice of communities. We usually hear that it is the duty of journalists to give voice to the voiceless, but I believe that communities are not actually voiceless. They always have something to say, and it is our role to amplify it, give them a platform, elevate them. This is a good example. This story is about the brave and passionate Orang Asli community in Malaysia who are defending their land, their way of life, culture, and tradition from logging companies who are destroying the forest they call home. So the work the story highlighted the work done by village journalists in the area who are documenting the destruction of their homes using their phones and sending them to activists to make sure that their voices are heard and their stories are told. It is a great body of work. It is quite a long read, but it is very compelling. And the other elements of the story, such as maps, as you can see, it is incorporated in the story. Uh, they map out where the environmental impacts were documented. So I think the red one, and then the blue ones refer to the environmental impacts on waterways. And I think these two yellow, these are, if I remember it correctly, these are their homes. So there are also the photos included in the stories are also incredible, and the story also incorporated the actual voices of the people, so the readers can actually listen to them. So the plight of the Orang Asli community is the same with the struggles of indigenous communities, not only in Southeast Asia, but across the world. And hopefully we get to tell more stories about the work of indigenous peoples because they are the best protectors of forests, and there is a growing body of literature that is backing this. And we also need to report about the threats they are facing to defend their homes from development that doesn't usually include them. Okay. So yeah, this one provides solutions. There is a study conducted by the Reuters Institute which suggests that people tend to avoid the news because it negatively affects their mood. Sometimes readers want stories that are not just negative, especially in this time of the pandemic. So this is where the solutions journalism approach comes to the picture. According to the Solutions Journalism Network, a solutions story focuses on a response to a problem and how that response has worked or why it hasn't. Solutions story also offers insights and reports on a response's limitations on why it doesn't work for the others. In short, it covers the problem, it gives solutions, it identifies the limitations, and it states the impacts. So, an example of this is the story written by our moderator, Kuka, for the Pulitzer Story Grant. It is about former loggers in East Java who are now protecting a forest. So, let's break it down. So what's the problem? The destruction of Meru Betiri National Park. Sorry if I mispronounce it. It faces the threat of deforestation due to illegal logging and encroachment. What is the solution offered in the story? Villagers were offered alternative sources of income. Former loggers are now cultivating crops and mushrooms, while others are making concrete bricks so they would no longer need to cut down trees. So, and what are the limitations of this approach? An expert interviewed said that economic based approaches should not be the only focus of restoring forest. law enforcement against people responsible for illegal logging should be also intensified. And what are the impacts? According to the story, around a community members said that around 60% of illegal loggers in the area left their old ways of cutting down trees within the national park and joined this alternative livelihood program. So this is another example of solution story. Uh, this is one of the two stories that I wrote for the Pulitzer Grant. This is about the local conservation project called Masungi G Reserve. The individuals behind the project were able to restore degraded limestone forest in Rizal province using the approach called assisted natural regeneration. It took them 20 years to bring back forest. The strategy ANR, assisted natural regeneration, is centered on the idea that nature can come back to life when it is undisturbed, meaning removing or reducing barriers to natural succession such as grazing and slash and burn is essential to the planting and nurturing of trees. So I'm going to present the limitation of this approach. An expert said that while ANR works for Masungi, the strategy may not work for other open areas in the country or those that are heavily denuded. And it may take a longer period of time before a forest is restored using ANR because it usually does not utilize fast growing species. Okay, so why solutions journalism? I highlighted this one because for the story grant, the Pulitzer story grant, our we utilized this approach, the solutions journalism story. So our stories that were published were solutions oriented. First, solutions journalism works well for stories about the environment and climate change. And this kind of stories can advance public discourse. They can provide solutions that can inspire communities and even policymakers to take genuine actions. But of course, no strategy is perfect. That's why we have to make sure that we always report on the limitations and struggles of solutions of the approach that we're highlighting in our story. And of course, we also need to vet the idea, uh, get some data or evidence to support any claims of success. So, where and how to find stories about forests? Well, peer-reviewed studies. Sometimes you also have to contact the authors for additional insights, and then press releases. But we have to be cautious in writing and interpreting these press releases, especially if it's from the government, because they tend to paint positive picture of a situation. So we need to do our work, verify. Social media is a good platform to look for stories because um, environmental groups, conservationists usually post updates or stories. Of course, building networks with environmental groups and conservationists also helps, and visiting communities. But of course, COVID-19, the pandemic is still ongoing, so it's going to be hard. These are other stuff that we can use in our reporting. Yeah, use visuals to tell stories. Data must be accessible and easy to interpret. When writing about forest issues, we can find data about it on Global Forest Watch. It has data on tree cover losses, and it also has global and country statistics, which can be very useful, especially when we want to compare or analyze trends. Also, Google Earth time lapse is useful for satellite imagery and allows us to map changes over the years. And Flourish, this tool is very user friendly, so we can use it in our when we want to include data in our reporting. So add human angle, make sure that there is a human interest element to your story. Um, you can feature and land defenders, indigenous peoples, and communities living around and within forests. For example, I wasn't able to attach the story. Uh, I wrote this story about the initiative of Ecosia. It's this search engine which plants trees. They began this initiative in the Philippines to reforest areas in the country, but instead of focusing on the news that Ecosia is restoring forest in the Philippines, I zeroed in on the work done by the indigenous peoples because they are the ones who are implementing the program on the ground. Also, to tell the story of forest degradation, we need to make it about humans. We need to frame it as an urgent issue for the well-being of the people. What does forest loss mean for our lives? Yeah, and then here, I think this is my last slide. Staying safe, how to safe while covering during a pandemic. We did the field work for the Pulitzer Grant in February. At the time, the Philippines was reporting thousands of cases every day. Actually, we're still reporting thousands of cases to this day. But that was before the terrible surge happened. So at the time, movement restrictions were a bit relaxed, and fortunately, we did not encounter major problems in our fieldwork. But of course, we followed minimum public health standards to protect ourselves as well as the people who we interacted with. Um, I actually got these tips from UNESCO. Uh, I know COVID-19 test can be very expensive, but I believe it's really important to get tested before doing field works, especially if you're visiting remote communities. You have to ensure that you won't be a carrier of the virus. Also, check the protocols of the area you're going to visit. Do they require COVID-19 tests? How about medical certificates? How many active cases are there, and how bad is the COVID situation in the area? Before the coverage, you also need to identify the nearest hospitals or clinics, police stations, and have the contacts of authorities in the area. Of course, always wear a mask and don't forget to bring alcohol or sanitizer during coverage. Well, as you can see in the picture, the one in the left is me practicing physical distancing when interviewing people. That's very important. We need to be at least 1 meter apart from each other. Sorry. And then make a list of people that you will meet and interact with during fieldwork. So, in the case someone gets COVID, it will be easier to trace and isolate people. Of course, nothing beats talking to sources face to face, but in the context of COVID, it is okay to get the input of other sources through phone call or Zoom interview. Um, Maybe email interviews are not a good idea, but if that's the only thing available, then yeah, we can also do that. So yeah, thank you so much. I hope you guys learned something, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Okay, thank you, Gaya, for your presentation. So, yeah, since yeah, I think I kind of forgot to mention this. This webinar is actually a follow up of our collaborative journalism project under Climate Tracker on forest restoration. So for 2 months, from February until March, five journalists from Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, and Cambodia are reporting on various ecosystems in those countries. Like for Gaia, it's the Sierra Madre in Philippines, and yeah, for me, I'm actually one of the journalists reporting under the program. I went to East Java to cover on forest restoration efforts. The project is supported by Pulitzer Center and Rainforest Journalism Center. So yeah, thank you, Gaya, for your presentation. So it's important for journalists to cover forest issues because forest is really important, an important ecosystem for us. It provides us food, and also uh, it is a living place for the indigenous communities and also habitat for biodiversity. But yeah, it's actually in danger, like in Philippines. Uh, the country has been losing of uh, millions of hectares of forests every year. So we need to tell stories about forests, like identifying problems on forest protections, and also identify efforts to restore those forests. But not only in technical terms, we can also go to the field and talk to the communities to amplify their voice. Sometimes they are kind of forgotten in this crowded media landscape. So I think it's also important to talk with the communities uh, to report on what they have been doing with their forests. And yeah, there are many sources to find stories about forests, and also it's kind of important to use visuals and add human angle to your stories to make your stories on rainforest appealing and interesting to the readers. Okay, thank you, Dr. Chandra and Gaya, for your presentation. So let's move on to the question and answer session. And we have questions here from Narayan Joshi to Dr. Chandra. Uh, I think your presentation has been highlighting efforts in Southeast Asia, but can you tell us more, Dr. Chandra, about efforts done by RICOF in Nepal? And is it, progressing better, yielding better results than in Southeast Asia? Or yeah, just can you tell us more about your projects in Nepal?
You need, okay, great. And it was muted. Well, thank you, Narayan, for your question. Uh, just for your information, we have our country office in Nepal, and we have some projects ongoing there in Nepal as well. Uh, when you ask this question about comparing Nepal with Southeast Asia, let me tell you that the context in each country varies, and the challenges situation in each country vary, and therefore the solution that you come forward with for restoring degraded forest also vary to the local context. As I said, the bringing social dimension into the restoration is an important aspect. It's not purely technical forestry initiative, but you need to bring the policy, you need to bring the social dimension, you need to bring all other dimension into to make sure that those reforestation efforts are successful. Fortunately, Nepal has a very long history of community forestry. It is one of the pioneering countries in the world where community forestry started long back in early 1970s and all. And it has a rich tradition of taking that CF model forward and using that model for a number of benefits, not only for increasing the forest coverage, but now Nepal is also has pioneered efforts like REDD plus, RED plus, which is a climate change mitigation mechanism in which is used globally. uh, our program, our project in Nepal are very much focused on how do we build how do we continue engaging with the local communities for climate change mitigation benefits, climate change adaptation benefits. We have two landscape that we are working in Nepal. And for your information, we have some priority landscape in each of our focal countries. So we are not a huge organization that we can work in the entire country. What we do is we identify the landscape that we can realistically work, because our country size, the staff size is pretty small. So in Nepal also we have two landscape. One is Tarai landscape and other is sacred Himalayan landscape in the high mountain areas. So these are two landscape that where we work. Currently, we have a program going on supported by UNDP, which is very much using agroforestry as an approach to restore degraded forest areas in some of the project area in Tarai landscape, basically. We did a program called Trees and Bees, which is basically doing the plantation activities, not only in the forest area, but also in the agricultural land areas, and also at the same time bringing beekeeping as an income generating activities in Sarlahi districts in Nepal, basically, which is again part of Tarai landscape. And that program has been pretty successful, and now it has been taken up by a number of municipalities, and they have kind of made as part of their landscape management approach. It has been taken up by a Jeff program, which is currently going on in landscape, Tarai landscape. It has been taken up by UNDP. So these are some of the initiatives that we have done. But as I said, in terms of the challenges related to the reforestation, they are very, very much country specific, context specific, and you have to really remodel or apply your approach according to the local condition, not only the physical condition, biophysical condition, but also to the social situations, to the policy level situations, and the stakeholder that you are going to work with. I hope that answers your question, Narenji.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chandra. So yeah, we Rikov has been also doing lots of work in Nepal. So yeah, I hope that continues. To uh, to yield great results on the ecosystem, and then maybe helps us, dealing with the climate change. Okay, so the next question is, yeah, we can see in the chat box from Hanilin Repato. It's for Gea. How should journalists report about biodiversity loss that is related to forest clearings? How can we make people care about the loss of plant and animal life? Yeah, this is also a question that my friend has been asking me. Why should we care about the loss of plant and animal life? So over to you, Gaya.
You need to unmute, Gaya. We cannot hear you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Um, Thank you for the question. Yes, the question there is, why should ordinary people care about the loss of plant and animal life? Why should people care about when the forests near their homes are getting degraded? It is a major issue, the loss of biodiversity, but I think it is hard to notice that there are, say for example, fewer birds in an area because than they were 30 years ago, because you don't usually notice these things. So we have to frame biodiversity loss as an urgent issue for mankind. I mentioned this earlier when I talked about making forest degradation issue a human issue. We need to make people care and realize the invaluable services of ecosystems. For example, mangroves, they protect millions of people from coastal flooding. They also serve as nursery of marine species. So, and when we lose insects, we lose pollinators of vegetables and fruits. So I think, in other words, it means that when the nature is degraded, the quality the quality of our life is also affected. So I hope that answers your question.
If I may just add on top of what Gia said on that is basically, yes, definitely the point that Gia mentioned are very, very important. And those are, some of the fundamental reasons or justification why we should keep our forests intact. On top of that, if you look at the rainforest area, like, in Southeast Asia region or in Brazil or in the Amazon region or in Congo Basin and all, these forests are inhabited by a number of indigenous communities, and their bread and butter, they literally, their daily life is dependent on the forest, on the biodiversity rich forest can be, you can have a monoculture teak plantation, that also you can call a forest, and you can have a highly rich forest which is highly biodiverse forest. So people's, their daily life are, for their food, for their medicine, for their shelter, for their cultural rituals, for their religious purposes, people depend on the forest for number of regions. Secondly, these forest ecosystem provide number of ecosystem benefits. If any forest area is adjacent to agriculture area, the forest next to agriculture area functions as a watershed, and therefore it helps in maintaining the soil moisture of the agriculture land, and therefore the productivity of the agriculture land can be ensured. But if you do not have the forest nearby, or if forests do not have, play the role of watershed function, then you are losing an important function of the land, of the forest land, which will have impact, positive or negative, on the agriculture land in the downstream areas. So that's another benefit. Having a rich biodiverse forest also builds the ecosystem resilience against climate change. Let's say if there is any disease outbreak in a forest area, and if you have plenty of species there, then that disease outbreak will attack few species, not necessarily all the species, because some of the species can still resist against those disease outbreak, and they therefore will help keeping the forest intact in some way. But if you have a monoculture, one disease spreads, the entire forest is gone. So that forest, that biodiversity rich forest also helps basically building the ecosystem resilience, as we expect, as we talk about building the resilience of the communities who depend on the forest. Same way, we also need to build the ecosystem resilience which can fight against, various kind of natural disasters. So these are some of the reasons why we should protect our forest, and why should we tell people that they should be conscious enough to protect the forest.
Okay, so yeah, it's not only about the lives of plants and animal life, but forest protection is also about saving our humanity's life. Yeah, like you said, if we don't protect the forest, we it will disrupt the watershed. That will also disrupt the agriculture production, and then yeah, food shortage everywhere, anywhere, everywhere. So it will also harm us eventually. So yeah, I agree with Gaya's and Dr. Chandra's answer. Yeah, we should make forest deforestation or forest degradation, and also its efforts to restore the forest as an urgent issue in our life. Okay, so yeah, I believe we still have many questions, but yeah, due to the limited time, I think we have to end our session here. But before we um, end our meeting tonight or today, I'd like to uh, oh wait, we okay. So I think we have one time to more for one more question. So it's yeah, for Gaia, plenty of bug destroy rice plants in Indonesia that is caused by deforestation, uh, and also bats as because bats as natural of bugs, carnivore also affected by this deforestation. So, how journalists should narrate this fact to push the government to make better policies or regulation?
Sorry, Kuka, can you repeat like the first part? I did not get that part.
Yeah. So the deforestation has caused loss, biodiversity loss, and it disrupts the food chain in the forest. So how do you think journalists can narrate this fact in their stories or reporting to push the government to, to make better policies or regulations?
Um, okay, so I think that first of all, you should visit the communities to know what is actually happening on the ground. As I mentioned earlier, you need to give platform to their concerns so that their concerns will be heard by those in the government, the policymakers, and then I think that you also need to interview experts on what has been causing this kind of biodiversity loss, and then what should be done to reverse this trend. And so I think if you combined anecdotes from the communities and the expert opinion, that will make a great uh, cause for the government to act on the problem on the ground.
Okay, so yeah, we need to provide more perspectives from other sources to make those facts narrated well, so the government can pay attention better to these issues. Well, if they want to pay attention, I'm sorry for that. Okay, so
That is your role to make sure that they pay attention, basically.
yes, I agree with that. But
Yeah.
sometimes they just don't want to hear.
All
Uh,
right.
okay, so thank you very much for your questions. Yeah, we still have several other questions, but all questions not answered during this live session will be answered in the guidebook that Climate Tracker will publish in a couple of days. So stay tuned. Just pay attention to our websites because we will publish it there. Okay, so I think that's the end of our session tonight. But before we close, maybe some closing statements from Dr. Chandra and Gaya. Perhaps Dr. Chandra, if you have any closing statements about the forest restoration and maybe how journalists can cover this issue better.
Yeah, well, what I was telling earlier is basically this is a subject which is of global significance. It's not only about one particular country. This is a global significance. It has implications on the livelihood. It has implications on the business those private sector do. It has implications on the government, how government frame their policies. So this is something which we cannot ignore, and we cannot afford to ignore and just turn a blind eye to these kind of challenges, because the survival of the humanity is dependent on the survival of nature. We have seen the pandemic that we at the moment, the havoc it is causing all across the globe, and this is believed to be starting, we call the zoonotic diseases, a lot of diseases coming from the forest area. If those forests do not remain intact, they may be source of number of disease or virus spread and all. So, we know the importance of the forest. The time here is to take some action, some concrete actions. And, for me, the way forward will be like, sometime what happened, the scientific community is too busy in producing academic articles, publications, and all. But then, how do you translate those academic articles into something concrete, something actionable on the ground, something simple language, which the end target group can understand, including the community, the policy makers, the private sector, the CSOs. They can take those and use those results, scientific results, to something really workable on the ground. And that's where I see the role of people like you, the climate tracker, and Gia and Karisa review, where you have to really translate those scientific things into much simpler language, which a common person can understand. And then really think about, yeah, we have some role to play here. We have some responsibility to do towards forest restoration, management of forests or biodiversity or natural resources as a whole, basically. So that would be my kind of closing remark, repeating the same thing what I said earlier. And happy to be here, and looking forward to work with you, and also happy to answer if there are any more questions coming from the audiences. Unfortunately, because of time limitation, we could not answer all the questions, but please feel free to reach out to us if you want any answer from our side to some questions. I'll be happy to draft some brief answers to the questions. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Chandra. Now over to you, Gaya. So, closing remarks on maybe how and yeah, journalists should cover more about the forest degradation and restoration in the future.
Yeah, Dr. Chandra said it best that there needs to be collaboration among journalists, NGOs, CSOs, and then the scientist community so that we can convey the needed messaging to more people about forest degradation, about the catastrophic impacts of climate change, because it is the biggest existential crisis in our time aside from the COVID-19 pandemic. um if this pandemic ends, we're still going to face the impacts of climate change. And so yeah, I agree that we need to facilitate sharing of information and access to sources. That can be done if we collaborate with the NGOs and the scientist community so that we can have a better grasp of what is happening. And for journalists, I said it before that we really need to put a human face in our stories, because if these ecosystems get destroyed, we we will be affected. As Dr. Chandra mentioned, it affects agriculture, degraded forest, displaces communities, especially the indigenous peoples community, who are the best protectors of the lands, of forest lands. And then even for us, like for example in the Philippines, the impact of the forest degradation became more evident when Ulysses hit the country last year, because a part of Metro Manila, it is our capital, was flooded. And why was it flooded? Because of the degraded state of watershed upstream. So it's not only the people in that province that is affected, but also the people outside uh, the province. So it is important that we need to get the message across so that policymakers, the government, can be aware of what's really happening and take actions. And even though the ordinary people, and that's why we also need to do more solutions oriented stories, because it can drive people to action. If we offer them solutions, even communities can think that, oh, it's possible, so we can do something about it. So yeah, I'm really happy to be given opportunity to speak at this event. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Gaya, and also Dr. Chandra again for your time. It's been an insightful discussion tonight about forest, deforestation and also forest restoration. Also, thank you for all of you who have come to this webinar. Again, this webinar is a follow-up of our collaborative reporting project under Climate Tracker on Forest Restoration, supported by Pulitzer Center and the Rainforest Journalism Center. And like I said, please, stay tuned on our website because we will publish the guidebook on rainforest stories in a couple of days, based on our discussion in this webinar. So thank you again. Stay safe and well, and see you next time. Bye. Good evening, good
Thank
morning,
you.
and good afternoon.
Goodbye. Thank you. Good
Bye.
night.